And for those of you that might just be joining us, you're watching America's Future Series. This is the National Security Dual Use Technology Summit. I'm Scott Murray, David Hamilton, the founder, CEO of America's Future Series, and we're delighted to continue to welcome you all. For those of you that just jumping on board.
Yep, and tell your friends they can still jump on board.
Absolutely, right? Absolutely.
They can join Todd here in a second.
Yep. Okay, well, let me do a little introduction here. I'm talking about Todd Forsman. He is the Senior Vice President of Government Affairs at TMG Corps. He's a former Marine, an entrepreneur, strategist, and certainly a leader. He earned a Master's of Arts in Security Studies back in 2009 from what is now called the Graduate School of International and Defense Studies. He also studied Spanish at the Defense Language Institute Foreign Language Center and went on to become a foreign area officer, spending much of his time in Latin America after leaving school. And after he left the Marine Corps back in 2015, Forsman became more exposed to emerging technologies that he wished he had well on active duty. And I'm sure you're not the only one that felt that way. Todd Forsman, welcome, my friend. How you doing?
Thank you, Scott, and doing great this morning. Thanks for having me, and David and the America Futures Series team. Thanks for putting this event on. Really excited. It's been a great panel all through the morning. So many interesting topics discussed, and I'm excited to lead this next panel and introduce our next guests, which are the leaders that comprise the DoD innovation ecosystem. So we've got, let's see if we've got everybody, if you can come up on video, guys, Colonel Wisham, Colonel Diller, I'm seeing everybody popping up. Thank you all. All right, well, folks, in the interest of time, I think I'm just gonna press ahead with introductions for those of us that were able to join. If Leslie or Colonel Diller can jump in, we'll get some intros there and we'll just continue to press. So as I said earlier, we've got Colonel Jay Wisham. Colonel Wisham is the director of the Army Applications Lab that's located in Austin, Texas. Prior to joining AAL, he was a senior Army fellow at the University of Texas in Austin, where he studied developing and emerging technologies for an Army ecosystem by employing cutting edge and emergent technology and better partnering with private industry. He was also lead for the artificial intelligence section in the AAL and the Army Futures Command, the next generation combat vehicle cross-functional team, and as a program director for project conversions. He's had multiple command and staff combat deployments, and he has a specialty in reconnaissance and surveillance. Colonel Wisham, thanks for joining us. And we do have Leslie and Colonel Diller joining now, so perfect timing. Thanks for joining, guys. Starting from the top there too. So Colonel Diller, he is the director of AFWorks. Colonel Diller is an accomplished pilot, test pilot, and instructor. He took command of the 586th Flight Test Squadron and served as the chief of the Air and Space Force Branch, Force Application Division, and then the chief of the Joint Force Integration Cell on the Joint Staff JA. He has been the Air Force advisor to the Office of the Secretary of Defense, Strategic Capabilities Office, and the Rapid Capabilities Office. This is also detailed as the Assistant Director of Aeronautics at the White House, the Office of Science and Technology Policy. Colonel Diller, thank you very much for joining the conference this morning as well. And then next we've got Captain Ben VanBuskirk. Hopefully I'm saying that right. If not, please feel free to slap me around and provide some rudders here. Thank you for that, sir. Captain VanBuskirk is the new director of Naval X. He leads the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for research, development, acquisition efforts, and naval agility. He's got over 20 years of experience in the military. He's had numerous leadership roles, large and small organizations, to include military special operation units, large aircraft area-based squadrons, a VMware team, and as a nuclear strike advisor to the President of the United States. So I think that means he carried the football at some point. He's been known for developing winning teams and empowering and guiding others to achieve and surpass goals is what he loves to do most. So thank you, sir, for joining us as well. And then I believe, last but definitely not least on here, that for the introductions, Leslie Babich is the director of Softwork. Softworks is obviously the SOCOM innovation entity. She is a high performance and results-driven military veteran with over 28 years in proven leadership, operations, business development, planning, and management. She's got experience in a multitude of elite and global and diverse organizations. She's established a record of building high-performing teams, and is now in charge of Softworks out in Tampa. So again, thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate this. The panels have been great this morning, and we're going to continue on with a little bit of a discussion on the, the innovation ecosystem, the dual use innovation ecosystem, whatever words you want to use around it. to describe what we're doing and potentially touch on some themes and topics of how we could all work together better, both on the private side and on the government side. So I've got a few questions here to start kicking off. I'll throw these out to the audience and we'll kind of see where this goes. And I'll definitely be monitoring the chat and bring some of those in as well. So to kick this off, really, something that I was thinking about is like, hey, every military organization, government organization, we all have a mission, a focus, a reporting structure. We all fall into an org chart somewhere. And with the innovation ecosystem, that kind of moves around a little bit more than others. Units stand up. Some of the units that we're talking about now are very new in terms of military history. I'm just kind of curious from your perspective. And I guess I'm going to start with a name that's been in the ecosystem for the longest that I can see from on here. So Colonel Diller, this one's coming to you. Are we doing this right? What do you think of this? Is there room for improvement?
Well, I think this is a very important discussion, right? Alignment of mission, resources, and structure on this. It's a conversation I think I've had with most of the folks on the phone here. And I don't know that any of them have it perfectly right. For AFWorks, when we kind of reestablished last year, last summer, where I report directly to our service acquisition executive. And when we look at being able to bring this into kind of mainstream acquisitions, I do think that there's definitely a need to have that level of interest, right? Because it creates a direct tie to our program executive officers who are doing that capability development and being able to mainstream, I think, the innovation. Really, that the biggest challenge I think we all have is how do I get across the valley of death? And so I think it provides that level of visibility there. But there's certainly a variety of different options that in terms of making sure you're getting close to the warfighter, getting close to the technologist, and finding those right structures, getting that right level of visibility is certainly essential. And so we're currently on this experiment right now, and so far, great buy-in from leadership that I think's helped us be successful in that regard.
I appreciate those comments, and I think I really liked how you highlighted, where you actually fall in and who you report to. There's probably a lot of folks in the audience that don't know that exactly, but will understand it if we say it out loud. So I guess I'm going to go around the horn on that one, and just if everybody could kind of elaborate on that. I'll start with Leslie next. Leslie, where does Softworks fall in the zoo over there at SOCOM, and is it going the way that you think it should? Is there something we can do better? How do you feel about all that?
Yeah, I would say we consider ours more of a partnership rather than a direct report to anybody. So we worked directly with Mr. Smith, who is the acquisition executive for SOCOM, as well as really trying to engage directly with the warfighter at the team level. And our goal really is to educate and inform them on how they can leverage our ecosystem to find the technology that they're searching for. I wouldn't say there's really any kind of reporting structure in terms of Softworks and the relationship that we have with SOCOM. More, again, really a partnership and trying to reach out and be super connectors across the enterprise, really putting the team guys and their units in partnership with the program managers that would be managing that equipment if it was fielded across the force after development. So connecting all those entities together to know how they can work together to get stuff fielded to the warfighter.
Oh, very cool. Thanks for elaborating on that. And sometimes I think people might take that for granted and think there's like a direct report function, but I really like the way that you've elaborated and pulled out that it's more of a partnership, a collaboration. That's cool. And it probably would help a lot of folks from the company side to understand that, to navigate. So thanks for sharing those comments. Colonel Wisham, over to you. How about with AAL, and maybe even if you've got some thoughts on AFC and the other Army innovation orgs, that'd be helpful for this point as well.
Yeah, sure. Also, thanks for having us in here this morning, Todd. A couple things. So the Army Applications Lab, we're first and foremost an Army asset. So we work for the Army. Now, we work through Army Futures Command. So we generally work with General Murray, no pun intended there, like pretty closely. And there's some design by that. So as AFC was stood up, AAL was stood up at about the same time. And that was sort of our entry into sort of the DoDX kind of ecosphere from a service level. Now, you also have to remember, like when you look at terms of scale, there's about 1.2 million people in the United States Army. Like per capita, it's kind of it's a very large organization compared to most of our peer services. So there's multiple entities within the Army that will do aspects of what we would all consider innovation work, right? Whether that's a lab doing it in a certain way, or tie back to other kind of government activities, or you even have certain things that happen within ASALT, within the, kind of your classic, kind of legacy acquisition and procurement structure that the Army has. So, but, in terms of the thing that has a mission to execute innovative activities, whether that's problem solutioning or looking for different business processes and practices, that's kind of where we fit. So we do fall within that AFC rubric, and we work like in a very coordinated way with ASALT. So every one of our activities generally has a couple things in common. One, we have the end user, the problem owner. Now that's either a unit itself, whether that's General Purpose Forces, SOF, or whoever. Occasionally, other governmental activities will be involved in that as well. But whoever that customer is, that end user, then you also have where's the transition partner. Many times that will flow into an acquisition activity. So that's an early stakeholder build for us. And then you have effectively who owns the requirement writing process for that. Sometimes the customer and that person are the same, sometimes they're not. So that three-legged stool of like problem owner, requirement owner, and then transition activity, whether that's an acquisition function or not, that is brought together very, very early in pretty much every activity that we do. So from that aspect, we think that model works really well. It's a little bit of a microcosm of how normal modernization should occur. But what we're doing is a much more truncated kind of time scale, and we're really driving after really, really relevant problems in the right now. So our time horizon is not nearly aligned with classic sort of development and acquisition activities. We're really focused on right now, getting a minimal viable product out, bridging to an objective, perhaps, particularly that's where PMs come in. One of the things I would also kind of highlight, much like Nathan said earlier, like one thing that is different now than even a year ago or more, the amount of collaboration, coordination, and then actual like synchronized work between the DoD community is an order of magnitude better, like legitimately an order of magnitude better. So I'm here in Austin, Texas. I've got a strong AFWERX presence, a DIU presence, Ensign presence. We will periodically have folks from obviously talk to Ben every once in a while, trying to get some of his guys down here. They're probably the newest organization that's out there, and we're all looking to try to figure out how to help out with them. Between Softwork, JSOC Gap, and a variety of other activities in that world, there's a lot of people that will congregate either routinely, as a matter of course, 9 to 5 on Monday through Friday, or episodically in Austin, Texas. So I have that advantage. So we work very, very closely together, and we're all about co-investments in and out. Like if Nathan needs to start a project, I need to start a project, it's better to us first to collaborate, adjust our KPPs a little bit, and figure out how to go after something, as opposed to two distinct projects going after 80% of the same solution. And if we're talking at that level, I think on a weekly basis, frankly, and I think that's a good sign. There's always things to do better, straight up. There's always things that we can all do better, and we're trying to feed off each other in that way.
Awesome. Thanks for those comments, and really appreciate the way you tied in everybody connecting and doing that better too. So I've been a part of the innovation ecosystem from a founder perspective for about 4 years now, and I have seen the same thing. So echoing your comments, I think it's great. We've got the jointness actually happening and moving around. It's even more difficult than what I've seen in the regular joint world, because we're talking about an innovation ecosystem which is constantly evolving and moving around. So with that, I'll take it over to Captain VanBuskirk. Ben, what do you think about Naval X and its organization? How are you guys reporting? And kind of building off of what Jay was saying there, I guess you guys are officially the newest innovation organization from a service level. Is that accurate? Over.
Yes, it is. And what I love is what Jay was saying. Like literally yesterday, I get an email that's like, "Hey, and if anyone's seen the news, if you Google Naval X Task Force 59, you'll get the Defense News article that was published yesterday about what we're doing with unmanned as the Navy. And part of this is an overall unmanned task force that we're building up, and it is being built up right now. Naval X is part of this. It's a 4-star level task force, but it's based a lot on the lessons we learned from Army cross-functional teams. So like literally yesterday is like, hey, Nut, can you get a hold of the other folks from AFWorks DIU and Army Applications and them? And can we just do like a session to talk through lessons learned and going through all of this? And so, yeah, the guys don't know it yet, but I'm going to be putting out a note your way. But we've talked about this and go, why should we go it alone, right? We're going to try a whole new way of doing business. Let's go. We get to be kind of fast followers here, which is a pretty cool place to be. So we can reach out to our friends and go, hey, y'all went through this. What do you recommend? What do you see the pitfalls are? What should we do? And so I think that's pretty exciting, at least for me, that we're going that route and it's going to happen that way. And so we do talk all the time, and with all of them in Austin, it's great. Naval X, we are in DC, however, in Alexandria. We have tech bridges all over the country. We just don't have one in Texas yet. We're trying to figure that part out. And as far as chain of command goes, like Colonel Diller, I direct report operationally to our ASN RDA, which is our acquisition executive. But I also have a dotted line administrative chain of command to the Office of Naval Research. So our money we get for seed money in investment actually comes from ONR. It's not mine. If we find a great opportunity, we go through our chain, we go talk to the Chief of Naval Research. And particularly if you go to ONR's website, code 36 is the Naval Accelerator code, and we use them for seed money and various other folks in ONR if we go that route. For other money, we can go to really anyone else in the ecosystem, depending on the type of deal we're trying to put together. But that chain of command, ASN RDA operational, administrative to the Office of Naval Research, and it kind of works out, right? Because ONR does a lot of the more early stage stuff, whereas RDA is more procurement. And then we have a dotted line. I come from the OpNav staff. So everyone on Naval X is a detail lead. We don't have any full-time billets, right? Just same thing. I don't have a full-time budget other than a couple $1 million for funding and to keep, or for travel and to keep the doors open. It's all about how do we leverage the ecosystem? How do we find solutions to the folks that have money within Big Navy to get them the capability they need? And then, where was I going with that? Oh, and so OpNav staff is where I come from. So I'm actually on detail here to Naval X from OpNav, which are the guys writing the requirements. And so as you can see, it's about pulling all those together. The contracting support from Naval Research or from one of our tech bridge locations. Our tech bridges are co-located with warfare centers, and every federal lab, which is a warfare center, has T2 capability, which means they have contracting and they can put T2 together. So I think it's pretty powerful. And before I hand it off, just an example of dual use tech. While I'm in the back of a car right now is I'm actually up in Newport, Rhode Island. We have a tech bridge here, the 401 tech bridge. You can Google it and look it up. They have a phenomenal ecosystem here in Newport that's attached to our Undersea Warfighting Center, which is a federal lab, but they through a partnership intermediary, which is a nonprofit that is funded by the state of Rhode Island, by the county of Newport, and the economic development. We work together to really bring capability to the Navy and support small businesses. And so I think for this group, you would all appreciate it. We spent yesterday working with some of the most high-end yacht builders that do carbon composite and carbon fire hulls, making America's Cups boats, and going, all right, how can we work together to solve Navy problems? And how do we get you guys into our ecosystem as small non-traditional? So just a little bit about that, and I think that answers your question.
Most definitely does. Thank you for those comments. And I will take the opportunity, and Ben, this one's coming to you from a larger global perspective. You know, I'm a retired Marine, so alma mater, of course, on things like this and anything aviation, anything that's actually really high tech. We generally still report through the Navy on that. Could you share a few comments on how the Marine Corps plugs in with what you're doing? And then Nate, this is coming to you next for SpaceWorks if you're not tracking.
Sure. So yeah, Naval X is naval, so it's blue and green. And it was actually one of the founders of Naval X was a Marine, and the founders of the Center for Adaptive Warfighting, one of the Naval X lines of effort, was also a Marine. So we have Marine heritage here, and I am working with Marine personnel to get us more Marines. In the meantime, what we're doing through our cause, probably the greatest collaboration we have with the Marine Corps, and we have folks very involved with the Centers for Adaptive Warfighting, which we use for problem sourcing. But when it comes to the tech bridge and the small business side, we're pretty much looking into straight naval. However, I'm not going to steal anyone's thunder. The Marines have some really cool stuff and work that I'm working with their leadership on think of it as like a Naval X sort of defense innovation unit activity that focus completely on getting Marine Corps the capability they need. And that's something that's being worked on at the 3-star level in the Marines. So I'm not going to say a whole lot about it, but let's just say they are really excited about getting more involved into this ecosystem. But in the meantime, we support.
Good stuff. And I'm glad to see the beachhead is being established and will expand. Looking forward to on the next conference. We'll have a Marine face on here too, but really appreciate the naval leadership and all the leadership as always. So Nate, same kind of theory on that. Could you talk a little bit about Space Force, SpaceWorks, and how that's looking from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think, again, it got a level of interest and put, I think, in a great spot right now, because when you look across our portfolio, for AFWERX, we own the Air Force's small business portfolio. So that's just under $1 billion. That is a mix of right across our Department of the Air Force, both air and space. So the director of SpaceWorks is a deputy at AFWERX. And, when that was really envisioned, the thought was, the next pass could be the director of AFWERX is someone in the Space Force. And that could alternate back and forth. And so the collaboration has been fantastic. And really, the work that had been happening in the Space Force across the ecosystem, and our core 3 areas are AF Ventures, which is the outreach to industry with the technology, with Spark, which is our entrepreneur, our airmen and guardians internal to the Air Force that really work on the concepts and that gaps analysis. And then our Prime programs, which are, hey, here's how we take this emergent market and drive these core capabilities across the Valley of Death. They're embedded through and through in that ecosystem. In many cases, some of the things that have happened in the Space Force have really driven us further. Things that were happening in the Air Force. It's a fantastic collaboration to include this fall. Really, the focus is very much on our Space Force. So we'll be launching our Space Prime. Our first Prime was the Agility Prime, or the electric vertical takeoff and landing. Our Space Prime will be launching here in about the next month or so. And then we'll have a major solicitation for small business technology transfer research programs that'll be going out to the universities and research institutions, and those small companies. Will be launching that in the November timeframe. So it's really exciting things that are happening with the Space Force right now, and fantastic collaboration that it's been so far, as they've officially launched a couple months ago and are really now starting to take off in terms of growth and the opportunities to work in the ecosystem with other folks here. They already had a great relationship with DIU, and continuing to build that relationship up as we're going forward.
Well, thanks for that. Thanks to all you guys for elaborating a little bit on where you fall and how the partnerships and reporting work. I think that was very informative, even to me. Every time I hear these conversations, I've been around this ecosystem for a while, seeing it from multiple perspectives, and it's always changing slightly, and it's good to hear the latest update. So appreciate that. I'd like to build on this theme a little, and some of you guys already leaned in on this. I think another thing that's maybe less understood, especially from a company perspective, is how do we leverage different funding streams that are available, from a department's perspective to do the things that you do. So, for example, I know some of you have mentioned already, like, hey, we've got a certain small budget that keeps the lights on, lets us have a staff, do these types of things. Of course, AFWERX, we've got a strong tie to CyberSitter. Ben mentioned some of the tie to ONR. Leslie's mentioned some of the ties to the collaboration and coordination that can happen there. I'm just curious to hear you guys' perspective a little bit deeper on what you can share on how that's one of the kind of, I would say, when you become a ninja master at the Department of Defense, especially, where all the money is and how to move it around and connect folks to the right things. How do you guys think of that? And I guess I'm going to start, Leslie, if you'd like to kick us off on this one, that'd be great.
Sure. So obviously SOCOM is a much smaller budget than the services. So we do like to partner with other entities for our projects that we do, as long as there is a benefit to SOF. We can absolutely partner with other agencies and services on projects. And it's actually very simple in terms of MIPRing money. We have done collaborative projects in the past. One of the items that was developed here was the Silent Tactical Energy Enhanced Dismount, or STEED, but we worked on that in partnership with the Asymmetric Warfare Group and Army Futures Command to do that. And we've got projects that are in collaboration with RRTO and other agencies as well. So absolutely love to work on common problem sets and pull resources together. And really be able to buy down each other's risk and be very conscious of the taxpayers' money that way. So again, I think the more that we can continue to communicate about common problem statements, the we'd be able to do projects together with the other services and agencies.
Well, thanks for that. I've got one quick follow on for that, and just kind of from my perspective as you're talking to, and just curious, how does Softworks view, the connection to other funding through like potentially connecting to VCs, external, things like that? Do you guys have a role in that part of the ecosystem?
Not necessarily. I mean, obviously, there's quite a few VCs and angel investors that would like to support the companies that do work with all of the innovation hubs, especially because a lot of them are small, non-traditional businesses and don't necessarily have the resources to scale immediately to those FAR-based contracts or the larger contracts. So we are always happy to kind of educate them on what resources are available to help them, both in terms of structure, education, and funding, so that they can take it to that next level.
Awesome. Thank you again for expanding on that. Jay, I'd like to bring it over to you. And then as you go through your comments, what I think I may know about the Austin ecosystem, if you can touch on that last question I had with Leslie there too. How did the formal kind of engagements inside of, funding actually work inside of the government, and then external with, Capital Factory, things like that standing up out there in Austin?
Yeah, sure. So a couple open thoughts on this one. Understanding not just how the government works, but kind of the different flavors and colors and shapes of the money is really, that's an underutilized skill for most people in industry. And I would say it's an even more underutilized skill for most people in government. But that mastery of that, the ability to understand what you can do with SIPR versus RDT money versus congressional ads versus these different things, that's a critical skill set that I would offer to industry, like that you need to look at and kind of offer like, hey, I need to know that you're already on a SIPR contract with the Air Force. That opens up opportunities for me to use different types of funds with you to solve your problems. Or let's say you are on a government contract with the Department of Interior, whatever. Understanding that and then being able to work back through the system to figure out, well, like, hey, what are the types of monies I have in my budget? So, for example, AAL used multiple different types of money, right? That's pretty critical. The other thing is when you have that level of situational awareness, and I'll kind of throw a pitch out real quick to Lauren real quick, or Leslie, excuse me, that Steve was something we did at AAL in conjunction with him. So we were the actual like problem driver for that when we pulled the problem out of soft, and we worked with a lot of people. When you understand how you can move money in different ways, and it's really less about money, it's about resourcing, whether that's bandwidth and getting the end user involved, like all the way through the process from a time management perspective to moving different types of monies to not just get you the thing, but then push it across the line where you can proliferate it to other organizations or other activities for a sustained purpose. That's critical, like understanding that linkage. That helps you be a way better teammate on the government side, and it helps you be a way better teammate and advocate when you're working with industry. So like don't underestimate that, right? Specifically to your question about Austin. Austin is, I would say, bordering on unique. It's definitely uncommon. There's a couple other places, depending on where you're at in the country, that have kind of this interesting hub effect of investment activities at multiple different levels, different parts of industry components that we're all interested in, and this wealth of small businesses or non-traditionals, right? So understanding how the byplay of all of them and really being a really, really good connector is a clutch activity. So we will work with kind of 3 tiers of industry or private folks, and this is kind of how I break it down. And this is just a good rubric. You have your solvers of whoever they are, and we kind of have a remit to go after anybody that has the right solution. Now, generally, we don't work with your defense primes, like we have plenty of access to that from other means. But by the way, I would offer that a small business is not as small as you might think. The LA Lakers are technically a small business. So when you start thinking about what does a small business mean and what is a non-traditional could be an industrial robotics company that works with Tesla, Ford, and whoever else, but doesn't do government contracts until you start engaging them, right? So you have this wide swath of people, or it could be the 2-person startup, like down 4 blocks away in Austin, which we've got some of those we work with. You have that solver community. Then you have this kind of interesting midpoint of folks that are accelerators or discovery agents that are trying to help gather that and pull that in either to the government or other commercial sectors. Folks like us on this net are actually cracking that part of that layer down a little bit, where the traditional model of, hey, if you come to my consortium, I'm going to help you find, a solution within my 72 companies on my list, right? We're really breaking that part down. So that layer is changing and morphing to where what they're trying to do is find people that are solving problems that I'm interested in and then making them better, like starting to work investments through their side to make them a better athlete when they come to compete for a DoD contract. So that middle layer is kind of a key kind of interlocutor. It's also a good reconnaissance capability for you. That last layer, that top layer, is kind of what you were directly referencing, and that's your classic VC structure, or other just like small term or targeted investment activities. Now that 3-stack layer, if you're really slick with it, what you want to do is figure out, here's your problem space, who are my solvers, making sure you got good discovery agents, or people that are maybe advocating and investing internally to make better athletes to come up. And then as you're going through your process, and let's say you're deep in, you're really deep into a phase 2 cyber, or you're hitting deep into an RDT project, you're like a year in, and it's working really well. It's working really, really well. What we like to do is we like to start communicating to the investment community in Austin and some other places. What we don't do and what you can't do is say, please look at this company. What we will tell them is, here's the type of work that we, the government, are investing in. And by the way, if you follow all of our Twitter feeds and LinkedIn feeds, you'll generally see who we have on contract. That's not crazy. So we want to communicate to the investment community what we are interested in and where we're putting skin in the game. Because, by the way, most investors don't use cyber as a valid kind of revenue stream. So what they look for is a longer form engagement from the government with an individual company. That's really where you start piquing their interest and you start turning one government dollar into 10 overall dollars, right? So that's kind of how we view it. And inside Austin, just because of the confluence of all the activity here, we can work that full stack. And that's kind of one of the unique things. Capital Factory, the physical facility where we're at, where some of Nathan's guys are, they really hyper accentuate that, and they bring all of those different component pieces into one physical location. It's very, very handy to do that. So that's kind of where we're at in Austin. That's also sort of how we see that interaction kind of in that vertical stack.
I really appreciate that, especially expanding on Austin there. It really truly has turned into not just for a dual use innovation ecosystem, but obviously the overall kind of, startup ecosystem in Austin everybody's a Silicon, Beach, the Silicon, whatever you put on front of it now, Austin is definitely its own thing. And it's pretty cool when you get to see it in person. So appreciate those comments there. Nate, I'm going to kick it over to you for the AFWorks perspective on funding. And please do comment a little bit on how you guys view, which is pretty unique and I think innovative and leading in its own in its own right, as how you connect to VC.
Absolutely. So, I think one of the keys that we've seen, I think we would all agree that a little bit more stability, having a stable pot of funding would do phenomenal things for our ability to move forward in this innovation system. The one area where our leadership said, hey, here's a stable pot, and that is that SBIR, STTR budget. So with that $900-ish million a year, we've really broken that out where some of it continues to go towards specific defense topics, but we have a good amount of it, the majority of it, going to this open topic approach, where we at the beginning start with around a $50,000 bet on that open topic, have focus areas to guide a bit, but really it is an open topic. The beginning of that process, so right from the start, is including the warfighter. It's including the technologists, and it's including the acquirer, to make sure that we're making bets on those companies that we can commercialize. The thing we really are looking to do is, how do we move these companies forward? Of those initial group of companies, right, around 1,000 a year, then going to those bigger bets, around $1 million phase 2. The other thing that we're really trying to push a bit more is this idea that for us, commercialization and introducing new participants in this defense ecosystem doesn't necessarily mean success is not necessarily a follow-on phase 2 contract. Though, again, we're looking at targeting around 400 of those phase 2s, but introducing them, in some cases to another joint player as Jay had mentioned, there's a multitude of companies that are out there that might make a better fit for the Army. The Army can pick up that topic, and the competition, they can run right away on a phase 2 or on a phase 3, as well as including to some degree the larger defense primes. That there is an opportunity in this ecosystem in a lot of different ways, and so we create that open front door again with some data sharing activities that we're working to improve across this ecosystem, ways of providing that connectivity so that one door, whichever door you pick, can still lead you to the most fruitful path. Eventually, with that funding, we have this Strat 5 program. We awarded about 20 Strat 5s last year. Those are up to $15 million of SBIR funding. But we're really looking at that follow-on funding, whether if it's defense only, making sure there's another government player that is matching 1-to-1, or if it's a dual use, having an external player, right, a private capital in a 2-to-1 matching. Because again, our purpose on that SBIR funding is to meet the statutory requirements of commercialization and driving forward. And so I think that ability to scale from a $50,000 contract to a $40 million contract over the course of a year has made it compelling, but we don't think that's necessarily enough. And that's the reason we've launched our prime programs, that in these key emergent tech areas, where we're finding a path that we actually have money that then goes into our longer DoD budgets. And that's our Agility Prime program, where we've seen a really fantastic participation and growth. We've had our first airworthiness for an all-electric aircraft this year, manned electric aircraft, 4 other participants in that from an airworthiness perspective, another 20 or 30 companies that are there. So how do we grow a little bit more deliberate that ecosystem? Fantastic partnership with the Navy at their test pilot school, with the Army, looking at some of the airworthiness approaches. And so Marine Corps as well, having put some funding into this. So that scale, being able to move at scale and being that trusted partner as we're going across that scale has been, I think, part of the success, where we've seen about a 6-to-1 for every SBIR dollar we spent, a follow on $6 in this approach. And so we think, there's ways to continue to build that partnership, to continue to show that trust in scaling this innovation in a way that really starts to move the dial, both for us and for the VCs, for the investors, more broadly for our national security technologies that are out there.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing those comments. And Ben, I guess it's your turn. Before you go, I'd like to add one little component to yours. So what's always been interesting to me from a Navy and Marine perspective is, something you started to mention in your previous comments, which is the connection to ONR. So a large existing ecosystem with RDT&E funding, labs. Obviously, all the services have labs, but please make a few comments on that as it relates to funding from your perspective with Naval X and everything going on. Thank you.
Hey, could you do me a favor, because my car's finally come to a stop? If you could repeat the last question, the one thing Navy Marine Corps specific.
Yes, it's ONR. Your connection to ONR and any are there any direct connections to different types of funding streams in ONR through your relationship with ONR that maybe are unique for Naval X?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. So I'll first answer the question on because like I said, I don't have a pile of money, for lack of a better term, for investing. We partner for it. And so, for example, for the SBIR program, Bob Smith, who is the head of all Navy SBIR, I was sitting next to all day today. We're in the same code in ONR, code 36 from an administrative standpoint. So we work together routinely. And it is about collaboration. So, and we really look at it. I think the best way to describe how we make deals is the Harvard Business School model for entrepreneurship and venture capital. And they talk about people, opportunity, context, and deal, right? It's really an entrepreneurial model. And when I talk to VCs, they're like, yeah, the way you guys work is very much like a VC. So I'll give an example where we use ONR seed funding to move something forward. So with the OpNav staff was working on, they need a digital war room. I'd love to go into more details. I don't know, but we built a MVP of a war room, but it was using whiteboards and stuff like that. It was very popular. Like, how do we digitize this? So we did some tech scanning form at Naval X, with a handful of companies that were great. OpNav was like, really want this, put together a proposal, and then went to go get it funded. And surprise, even at the 3-star level, it's like, hey, we don't have 500 grand for this pilot, and we don't even have a contracting vehicle. So it was dead. And so I start looking around. I'm like, okay, what do you need? You need the contracting vehicle, you need a high-level champion, you need someone to cut a check. And so we started asking around, and I have a conversation with Chief of Naval Research, and he goes, hey, I am really interested in piloting something like this. Something where it was an unrelated conversation. I didn't even bring it up. He goes, hey, I really am looking for a software that does X, Y, and Z, and I'd love to pilot something. So I'm like, holy cow. So I go call up these guys at OpNav. I'm like, dudes, get me this proposal you all had. Get it to me. I just need to find a contracting vehicle, assuming I have a sponsor who likes it. We brief the sponsor. He's like, I would love to do that. Let's figure out a way to make it happen. So I used ONR funding to be the sponsor for this. I worked it with his comptroller, working the right program elements, found the money out of the right code, and then made a contracting vehicle, did some homework, they have an IDIQ contract at Dahlgren, did that through my TechBridge network, and essentially we built the deal that way. And within about a month, we had it funded. With him being the sponsor. So that's just an example of one. Another one was our Agility Summit a couple weeks ago at Naval X. We had a challenge, and we had, like 7 different teams pitch ideas. And we had Dr. Rich Carlin, who's the head of Code 36, he runs the Naval Accelerator and sponsors us. He provided money to fund from ONR funding these projects that were pitched. So those are just a couple examples where we've directly used ONR funding to move and seed things to get them going. And in the meantime, we can continue to Sherpa folks through going in, all right, what's the next follow-on deal? What program office are we looking to drop this in? And so an example being next week, I'm spending most of the day at Pax River on Wednesday, working with program offices, PEOs, understanding their problem sets, and then communicating that with our TechBridge ecosystem, which is all over the country, so that when we have these problems or a solution, who could have it, we can go and pulse our network of our nonprofit partners associated with each TechBridge and the local ecosystems to find these solutions. If we get the hands, ideally, in the money of a business that's never done business with the military before, or somebody who, say, has an AFWorks SIBR phase 1 or 2 where they've got their foot in the door and looking for something different. And we can go with these problems and find them. But those are just a couple examples that hopefully you guys can use.
I appreciate those comments. And from everybody, thank you for sharing a little bit more on, not only who's who in the zoo, where you guys plug into, but how the funding and funding streams work, how you collaborate with, industry, venture, everything like that to kind of move these things, down the court. As that relates to the overall theme of the America's Future Series panel here, great power competition, which I guess is now being retermed as strategic competition. If you're able to join one of our first panels there, I'd just like to hear your thoughts and comments on, this may be the hard part of the question in the comment here. You'll hear a lot of, there's still naysayers in everything you do related to innovation. So a lot of folks will say, hey, this is innovation theater. Are we really doing anything? Are we moving the needle? You all as leaders in this space, I'm very curious to hear your comments and perspective on, what we are doing and how that leads to, our role and position in great power competition, strategic competition with, specifically China. I've got a feeling on this, and I don't want to bias everybody, but I will bias with this. Thank you all very much for doing what you do every day. I'm very proud to be a part of the ecosystem as a whole, and from a company perspective at TMG Core, it's always fun to work with folks that aren't dropping pack. We're all pushing through and figuring out what to do, and hopefully that doesn't bias it too much. I'm going to kick it over to you guys for some comments on innovation theater versus real innovation versus and how it ties into strategic competition. And Jay, I think I'm going to kick it to you first on this one.
Sure. So an overall view, let me frame this. I am a fan of ribbon cuttings and not groundbreakings. So what I mean by that is most people consider what is considered innovation theater. It's just like you're doing some things, you're going to do a demonstration for some people, and nothing really happens, right? Like you can start. There's a lot of work that gets started. I would say generally, the DoD is certainly not immune to that, but there's not a lot of work that gets finished. So that's why I say I really like ribbon cuttings, not groundbreaking, right? Now there's a reality that you need to do some things to generate these communication activities about what's in the realm of the possible and to generate some interest. That is a true statement. But you do want to focus your work with an outcome. You can go after an actual solution to a problem and still conduct a demonstration or a public activity or something that highlights things to senior leaders, aka decision makers. And also there's another thing in terms of like, are you just showing this to everybody to show that you're working, or are you actually using whatever activity you're doing as a targeted thing to get to a decision maker and help inform their decision on what the next step is, whatever that next step needs to be. So that's an overarching comment. So yeah, I'm for innovation theater. I would also tell you that innovation is an overused term. It's a lot like artificial intelligence. People are like, just put some AI on it, let's do some innovation with it. Like that, it doesn't work that way. Innovation also doesn't mean a novel idea. So for example, most of what we all apply is something that somebody's already working on and perhaps is commercialized in a whole different sector, but you're changing the application, you're changing the use case, you're looking at a different employment activity. What innovation is in a very real sense, particularly with the DoD, and this is, again, more short time spans, think like now to 3 years out-ish. It's really about your imagination. Like, what can you apply, from your imagination against this problem set and looking for solutions that are partially there, almost there, maybe all the way there, and you're like, hey, let's paint it green and blue and let's get it out the door, right? But it's that imagination that you apply in that very contextual sense of what's required for a warfighter, right? That's really where the innovation piece is. Now, what I would also tell you everybody on this call does is we look at innovative processes and practices. And again, it may not necessarily be novel because we all operate within statute, policy, and regulation. But how do you, it's not manipulating those things, but how are you working within and around and through those lanes to be better, faster, stronger, always working, kind of the Daft Punk style of development, right? That works really, really well. And if you want to consider that innovative activity, sure. What I like to think of it is, again, applying some imagination to a contextual problem. And whether that problem is getting money to a solver, getting a solution to a unit, getting the solution you provided to the unit into a program of record or a sustainable thing, all of that chain right there, that's really where the innovation is. So that's one comment. I would like to bridge very, very quickly into, like you mentioned, how this relates to great power, the great power competition. I will be very, very candid. We are not doing well in this regard. And here's what I mean. About 3.6% of the DoD budget yearly is generally slated to some sort of form of quote unquote innovation activity, roughly. And that's across all services, white money, black money, like all that stuff, like just total shot. 3.6% of the DoD budget is not a small number, right? But are we really getting our money's worth? That's the real question you ask. Now, what happens in other countries, and I'll call out a few, right? So Russia, Israel, a few other places like that, most places with high technical capability, but generally less resources. The way they execute innovative activities and their modernization activities is actually quite well aligned, because they will put something out there in a combat environment, in an operational environment at scale, and then they will rapidly work through it and innovate on it. SOF does this at a very small scale, right? They might need 10 things, not 10,000, right? They do that exceptionally well. The Marine Corps actually is a great model for this because they'll do it sort of in a battalion chunk, like with a MU or battalion landing team, and they've done that very well. From an Army perspective, I'm trying to figure out how to copy what you get a little bit out of SOF, a little bit out of the Marine Corps, but what you see potential competitors, like Russia and China and other folks doing, they really get things into the hands of the warfighters very, very fast, and they iterate at an accelerated pace. So instead of making these big, huge leaps of capability, like over 5, 7, 10 years, which is kind of the traditional Army model, I would offer the traditional US DoD model. They make just a ton of little stair steps trying to even out that curve. That is a problem. That is a very real problem in terms of not just quote unquote innovation, but actually modernizing your entire structure. So you can wait for 7 years to get yesterday's technology, right? Or you can start that curve a lot earlier. What we do at a small scale, I would offer is it doesn't always work for like capital systems like planes and tanks and stuff like that. But there are some lessons learned from what the innovation community is doing in terms of how that relates to modernization. And there's a direct impact on how we view our relative capability in a great power struggle, particularly when you start getting into the military aspect of, nation state power. So that's just a kind of an open comment to kind of address that piece you had.
No, I really appreciate those comments. Thanks for sharing them, and thanks for being so candid on your thoughts of where it's at. I do want to pick up one theme there because it's something that's near and dear to my heart. From multiple perspectives of me as a human, I'm pretty frustrated that we even have to bring up modernization. Modernization should not be a topic from my perspective that, the most powerful, nation on the planet has to do, but it is. And you're pointing that out, like we have to connect it. Innovation is required to modernize us to keep up with, some of the folks at a strategic level, non-state folks, everything like that. And always room for us to do better, but I think we're on a good path, and I really do appreciate those comments. Leslie, Jay mentioned some stuff about how SOCOM views this, and traditionally, SOCOM I think has carried that mantle of kind of connecting in a very unique way, and at least at the tactical level, doing these things. Can you provide some comments and some thoughts about how you guys are thinking about this and how that relates to SOCOM as it's viewing innovation in this larger scope in strategic competition?
Right. So obviously SOCOM is taking a look at kind of what that next step as we continue to have the responsibility for counter BEO, but also supporting, all of the services and whatever that might be for the great power competition or strategic competition. So, SOCOM, most of the innovation and improvement and modernization that SOCOM does is not necessarily on platforms, but is on the things that go onto the platforms that are provided to SOCOM by the services. There are some platforms that, we need to modernize, but keeping that in mind, like, again, moving forward together, SOCOM and the services, keeping that in mind, like what things are we going to need to add to some of these platforms that are developed by the services to make them SOC unique and to support our operators and our warfighters in the field, I think is really important. And I wanted to piggyback on what Colonel Wisham said as well. I think we have a very agile and globally dispersed workforce in SOCOM, and the warfighters are kind of everywhere. And their capability to test and evaluate things that are developed in the field, I think is pretty good. So any way that we can support services as well as SOCOM in doing that, I think is really important and important to consider moving forward.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Leslie. It's SOCOM's a unique beast, having served, about 2 years of my active duty career in the environment. I've learned so much there, and seeing how, they've impacted and affected things over time in this kind of space that we're talking in multiple other ways. It's always unique, and really appreciate your thoughts there. Probably heard my alarm going off, guys. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I have one more major question here, but we'll let you guys finish the around the horn on this. I really like the around the horn, so we get everybody's unique perspective. So Ben, over to you on how does this all fit in and tie back to strategic competition from your perspective at Naval X?
Okay, so I'll just say that I think what this is saying is from what I'm hearing is the administration wants us to be more innovative. And I was just answering some private questions in chat. The bureaucracy will not change until it's forced to. And there are a couple ways to force it. One is bold senior leadership. Everything I learned as an industry fellow said that. You need the CEO to come in and say, we're making change. So one way is for our executives that have the blessing from the administration to come in and say the status quo is no longer working. We're going to change, get Congress on board and all that. Another way is to do drastic budget reductions. And I've heard some word on the street that is one of the things that's being thought about is, hey, if we want to make DoD innovate, cut their budget by 20%. That'll make them actually divest of old things and find new ways of doing business. And so I just throw that out there because right now, I say all of us in the innovation space, the money we have is from, people on the OpNav staff. We spend $1 million before everyone has their coffee. The work we're doing now is $1 million here and there, which added the scale of the $700+ billion DoD budget is budget does. So you put your money where your mouth is, right? And so one way to do this is to force the DoD by our strategic wording saying like, hey, China, threat, but we're not going to go all there, which means throttle it back, figure out a better way to do things. So what I see is with bold senior leadership and then maybe some folks giving us the authorities, the resources, the money, the people to get serious about it, then we can scale what we're doing. And so really, we have this bottom up, what we're doing, and then you need the top down, and you need them both down. And I'll say, go ahead and Google this. The United Kingdom Royal Navy has gone agile for their entire acquisition system, right? And I was meeting with UA Brigadier General, their Chief Technology Officer. It's incredible what they've done. And they've just gone for it. They have gotten to the point where they said the status quo is no longer acceptable, and they are doing Scrum for acquisition, their entire acquisition system. It's really incredible. And we were discussing it. How do we match what's working over there from the top-down approach of radical transformation to really the approaches we're doing here from the bootstraps and the bottom up? But they got to the point where we have to change, and at what point will we go there? So I think it's bold. Take a look at what the UK is doing.
Really appreciate the candidness there too, Ben, and I think the audience does too. There's lots of good comments coming in the chat from all of this conversation. So Nate, last but definitely not least on this, as one of the more senior players representing AFWorks here in this conversation, how do you view what's happened up to now in terms of strategic competition? What are your thoughts on, maybe making it better, worse? What are you just thinking on this?
Yeah, absolutely. So without agreeing, I'll say, or without repeating, say largely agree with the fantastic comments that are here. I think to me, probably the most important piece of this in strategic competition is an understanding that this really is a whole of nation approach. This is going to require that we mobilize across stovepipes that we really have not done. We haven't had to do. And so I think that comes at the beginning from us building the partnerships, but building the partnerships that we can preserve those partnerships with trust. And so, over the last couple of years, we have added, 1,700 some new companies to our portfolio. How do we make sure that we continue to provide that trust? Of those companies, 75% of them are new and have not necessarily participated in this ecosystem. So it requires us, I think, to approach it largely, right? There's a culture piece that begins all of this. That culture with a bit of humility that I think, right, the rest of the team has talked about here, that there's fantastic ideas that are going to come from outside the traditional approaches that we've taken, and that establishes a collaboration really that starts to mobilize a number of people that have never really participated in this ecosystem. From that perspective, then being able to actually build that capability that's there, and it's that capability then that provides that competition. And it's competition not only to preserve security, but also to build that prosperity through that broader teamwork that I think, again, you're seeing here. We've had fantastic engagement with the interagency on this, which is a key player when we're in this dual use world. Certainly the international players are fundamental to this, and it requires, again, that trust, that openness, and again, a change in culture that I think you're seeing quickly, but we're not going fast enough.
Again, very much appreciate the candidness and the perspective there. So we've got about 5 minutes of time left here. So to the panelists on this one, I think the way I'll do it is just look for the biggest volunteer. I'm going to close with a question that we could probably go on for quite a bit on, but I'm curious to hear your guys' perspective. If there was one thing, just one, that you could change about the dual use innovation ecosystem as it exists today, whether it relates to how we collaborate, the funding associated, anything that you could change, what would that be? I'll give you guys like 10 seconds to think on it, and then if somebody wants to raise their hand and volunteer, please do. Otherwise, I will grab one.
And just quickly, more opportunity to provide more transparency for stability in funding, not just in the research and development, but allowing those things from an operations and procurement to actually get across, fenced off for those emerging capabilities, so that we understand there is a clearer path going forward.
I think that's an awesome one. We've still got some time, so let's actually, if we can get around the horn, if anybody else has any thoughts, one thing you could change from your seats, or if it could just change overall, that makes this dual use innovation ecosystem better.
Hey, it's not here. Mind if I answer real quick? This is great because I literally have all my Tech Bridge directors. 10 seconds. I said, all right, guys, what is it? It is, what would be really cool is if we could start off dual use from the beginning of curation for the problem. So instead of it being like okay, warfare, we're doing this government, play around with a little bit, or this industry, but just come in from the beginning have our process be a joint cooperative, bringing industry to the table from the very beginning of project curation. That's what my folks said. And of course, I would always say make contracting not so terrible. But I'd say number one is let's just sit at the table as a partner from the very beginning.
Awesome. All right, Jay, Leslie, we've still got time. If you guys want to throw in a comment, Leslie, you can go first.
I would say maybe on behalf of the innovation ecosystem and the businesses that are providing solutions, a simpler way in to figure out what each of the services and agencies and entities are looking for so that they don't have to go to multiple different locations to find it. And then a way for us to be able to share the companies that we found with each other and be able to provide feedback, because there is not really one location to be able to do all that.
Excellent points. Very much agree. Jay, over to you.
One quick thing, I think most of everything that I've heard everybody say in this one, like in some small fashion, we are all as a group trying to make that better. Like so I think there's light at the end of the tunnel for a lot of these comments, by the way. And from my perspective, I would like to make it a little bit cleaner and easier, or more acceptable rather, from a cultural standpoint. Because you can do this within policy, regulation, and statute to partner with private entities a little bit better, a little bit cleaner when you're going after something like, or governmental entities outside of DoD. So, for example, a lot of things we develop are highly related to disaster relief, law enforcement, a lot of those type of things. It would be very, very easy for us to co-work with like the state of Texas and DoD on a technology that every state trooper then carries, and guess what? It now has immediate application painted a different color with, for anybody inside the military, right? So it's less a mechanical thing. I think it's more of a cultural and imagination thing. Like having industries look at that and having the government be willing to think a little bit broader in terms of how you do this. Because when you actually have a dual use activity where there's a commercial activity and a DoD activity, everybody gets more of what they want. You get better, faster, stronger just by doing that. So imagination is probably the number one thing I would change, or lack of imagination.
I appreciate that, and very much want to say thank you to all of you as panelists for your comments today. I've really enjoyed the opportunity to connect with you. There's quite a few other things going on in the chat. I didn't get to them all. As usual, this is one of the most interesting panels from a attendee perspective, and a lot of folks want to talk to you. If you can drop ways for them to get in touch with your organizations into the chat, please do. I know there's the standard websites and whatnot, but if you can throw that in there, that'd be great. And then lastly, I'd like to close again with just another personal thank you to you guys as leaders of these organizations in the ecosystem that's keeping us on par in the game with this strategic competition thing overall. So I really appreciate it, not only as a retired service member, veteran, just as an American citizen. So appreciate that. And I guess American Future Service crew, over to you guys for the next event.
Sounds good. Thanks, Todd, so very much. And thanks to your incredible group. Really, what a team. So well done, well done. Stay strong and be safe. And we certainly thank TMG Corps, one of our incredible team sponsors. So we thank them as well. So well done, well done. America's Future Series continues. This is our National Security Dual Use Technology Summit. I'm Scott Murray, and the founder of America's Future Series, and our CEO has some comments he'd like to share with us all. David, take it away, my friend.
Well, there's two things. I just want to say, first off, knuckle draggers have gotten a lot smarter because Todd Forsman euphemistically refers to himself as a knuckle dragger. Well, right. I think we have to redefine what knuckle dragger means because he's obviously clearly a very, very bright man, right? And then secondly, these innovation groups, one change I'd like to see happen and have it not ruin a military officer's career or hurt it in some way. It seems that some of them, I think every one of these bright, high potential ones coming out of the academies, et cetera, needs to do a stint. They need to do a tour, if you will, with one of the innovations group. This notion of innovation and driving that into people's minds and into their fiber is something that the military needs. I would actually defer to Major General Bo Young on this, but I think there's got to be a way of having more people have a rotation in leadership positions who see the need to innovate in everything we do.
That's a great idea. I never thought of that. That's a really great idea.
There's just it's some, and I think a lot of people think they should be commanding troops only. That's how you get ahead,
Mhm.
whatever. I don't know,
Right.
but I think more and more that is changing, and people understand that we have to really use our heads, et
Oh,
cetera,
absolutely.
and
Yeah.
advanced technologies and innovation are key.
Yeah,
So
more now than ever.
with that, we should turn it over to Major General Bill Young, who knows all about
Good.
that.
Well, yeah, Dave, I think it's an interesting comment, actually. I do think the service overvalues command. This is somebody who commanded, a lot in the military, but I think I think we're getting better at it. I think we're getting better at recognizing that there are other assignments that are needed, particularly to create senior leaders and general officers. And so it's a slow moving train, but I agree with you. And I think hopefully we'll continue to see some movement in that direction.